All right, hello, zoology people. Happy Monday. Hope you all are doing well today. Here to continue with our discussion from last time. We started covering. We got into the very general characteristics of the Cnidarians. So we're going to move onwards with some more taxonomy. We're going to get into some more specific detail on this group. So again, just a reminder, Cnidaria because they have these stinging cells, these cnidocytes, right? The cnidocytes, then with these very specialized, very high-tech organelles, we call nematocysts, that are the actual stinging little mechanisms of these cnidarians. So we talked about all cnidarians having those cnidocytes capable of stinging with the nematocysts. Then we say we divide just kind of generally all the cnidarians into two categories, the polyp forms and the medusa forms. So today we're going to start off with the polyp, sort of the dominant body form that are the polyp forms. So again, depending on how mobile, depending on the sort of the position, the stationary versus the mobile body plan, medusas having the tentacles hanging downwards, the polyps plop down like a plant, and tentacles hang upwards. And again, this is a tiny bit misleading because we can have both body forms within the same organisms at different parts of their life cycle. And then we're going to get into that a little bit later. But let's just continue with some overviews of the cnidarian group. And we're going to focus a little bit on this space right here. This space right here. So we look at the idea of the digestive system, and I'm going to use the model of Hydra, right? So Hydra is a type of cnidarian. It's a type of polyp form. It's a common type of cnidarian. It's very small. It's microscopic, and again, we find it in freshwater. So that's a little bit unique with cnidarians. We typically associate them with saltwater, marine forms. This is a freshwater form, microscopic, can breed sexually, can breed asexually. But you can see here that body, the stationary part at the bottom, and then tentacles hanging upwards. So the polyp body form. Now, the Hydra, right, this type of cnidarian, um, and all cnidarians have this very, very simplistic type of digestive system. And I do want you to know this for your exam. We call this the gastrovascular cavity. Again, you will see this on your next exam. So the gastrovascular cavity. It's a very fancy word, but it's basically just this hollow space, right? So here we have this big hollow space that we call the gastrovascular cavity. So organisms will be captured by the tentacles, they'll be killed by the stinging cells, and they're moved in through the mouth. So we have a mouth, we have a digestive system that we call the gastrovascular cavity. There's some sort of dead prey item. Looks like a little Daphne or something, but we have this prey item in there. And once it's digested, oops, there's nowhere for it to go. There's no exit port. There's no orifice that allows for the release of digestive waste. So what has to happen? It's not very pleasant. If you know, good thing we don't use the same system, but all that waste then has to be removed out the same opening, right? So the mouth serves as both the hole, right, the orifice for bringing food in, and also for removing waste out. So again, a very primitive system. The digestive system of invertebrates will become more elaborate, but this is a very first sort of initial attempt at a type of digestive system. So again, all forms, all polyp forms have this system, and then all medusa forms have this system. So it's sort of lined in this yellow, lined in yellow. All that hollow area is then the gastrovascular cavity. So very primitive form. Again, they don't really have a mouth and an anus. They have the mouth slash anus, that again is this double purposed hole basically, right? So once we get into a little bit more of the taxonomy, So we're going to look at these major groups, right? So all cnidarians have the, that gastrovascular type of digestive system. Um, we're going to start off looking at the anthozoa, anthozoans, which are our coral and anemones. We're going to look at something called the man-o-wars. There's our little Hydra. A lot of people know of man-o-wars, and some people may have heard, oh, they're not technically jellyfish. Well, they're cnidarians, right? They have their own group. They're Hydrozoan, the class Hydrozoa, which is taxonomically different, phylogenetically different from the cubozoa and then the true jellyfish that we call the scyphozoa. So we're going to address each of these categories. There will be different lectures associated with each one. But for now, let's get into this group right here, right? The predominant polyp forms that we call the anthozoa. So again, phylum Cnidaria, class Anthozoa. There's a lot of, um, you know, different taxonomical groups under this category. But what this translates to, actually, it is a direct translation to the Greek language, the Anthozoa, which means flower animal. Right? Antho, flower, zoa, or zoo, animal. So if you do look at these, they look very plant-like. Right? They just sit there, the tentacles wave in the air. It's a polyp body form. And we know these as coral or anemones. If you watch the Nemo, right? Anemones. So these are the anemones with the tentacles and the polyp body plan, right? So different shapes, different sizes. Some are really small, some get quite large. All these types of anthozoans. So just some diversity, right? The different types of tentacles that can extend, they can retract back. And again, they have that big gastrovascular cavity, which allows for the ingestion of relatively large food items for their body size. And talking about Nemo, right? We have a neat ecological situation going on with the anemones and these clownfish or anemone fish. So um, we consider it to be a mutualistic situation where both individuals are um, basically are benefited from this situation. So basically, the large vertebrate, right, the fish, the clownfish, has a protective layer of basically of mucus biochemicals around its body that prevent these things from being triggered. So they can swim within these tentacles. They don't get injured. They don't get stung. They've built up tolerance over. We talk about selection and that kind of idea. So by them being here, right, the anemone is missing out on a big food item. So it seems like that's not good for the anemone. However, these fish being here attracts other fish that are trying to gain that same type of shelter, of a place to hide. They don't have that defense that the anemone fish does. They get captured, they get killed, um, and then the anemone basically benefits by allowing this clownfish to be here because it attracts other fish. The anemone benefits by living in a situation where it's all these tentacles lined with these nematocysts. So not many predatory fish are going to go in there and try to chase this fish down. So it seems like both of them are benefiting, and we consider this then to be a mutualistic interaction between these two very, very different species. So lots of different types of anemones. I'll try to find some videos that show those a little bit more in detail. But then we get into an idea of coral, right? So coral is, I think you have heard of coral. I think you've heard of coral reefs, that kind of stuff. So coral is basically an anemone, right? But it's a small anemone, a colonial type of anemone. And it's quite vulnerable since it's so small. So what it does is starts to deposit a protective shell around it. And this is what we term as the reef. It's a calcium carbonate type of structure, which builds up the reefs, right? So coral, where we have a healthy coral population, we very healthy coral population, we then associate that with a very healthy reef. The coral is the basis for the reef. It provides the structural habitat, the places for the fish to hide. Um, And basically, the healthier the coral, the healthier that whole ecosystem is there. Now, in recent times, we have learned a lot of things about coral. We've learned about their symbiotic relationships with algae, um, and because of climate change, because of different sort of negative aspects in our environment right now, we have a very not good situation that we call coral bleaching, right? So when conditions are good, we have the algae that are photosynthesizing. We tend to have a mutualism between the zoanthelids, um, and then we have basically again a healthy dynamic. Once those algae are pushed out of the coral, they tend to lose their color. They lose that mutualistic situation where they are um, gaining photosynthetic products from the algae. So basically, they stop feeding. If they're not feeding, they basically die, right? And that's what we start to see this decoloration, the bleaching aspect. And once the coral gets bleached, right? So we should have healthy coral, colorful coral. Um, the zoanthae are basically these algae that are associated with them. We start to stress the coral, they kick out the algae. We have this bleached aspect, and if those algae don't return, basically we have dead coral. And again, this is not good for many aspects. It's not good for the ecosystem, that coral reef ecosystem. Um, we lose fish, we lose all kinds of aspects of that system. It's not producing oxygen anymore, which is a bad situation for the whole planet. It's not taking up carbon dioxide, not releasing oxygen. And basically, it's having a big impact on global aspects. It's having a negative situation on local aspects where tourism starts to be decreased, right? So we get into some issues where all the coral starts to become bleached. You see a lot of these white aspects, um, and basically that doesn't attract tourism. That doesn't attract people to go spend money, go swim with the pretty fish and that kind of stuff. So it is a serious environmental aspect that we have to cope with at the moment. And I hope we learn more about these things. I hope we can address a lot of these big climate aspects that are going to have a tremendous impact on our life, on our health for many years to come. So that's the idea of the Anthozoa, right? So I'm going to pause this here and I'll continue with the jellyfish next.